Lady Wishaw's Hand by Richard Marsh, as published in the Cambrian newspaper on the 12th of April 1895. Read by Bethina. Chapter 1. It was a woman's hand. In life, in its proper place at the end of a woman's arm, I could easily believe that it had been beautiful. But as it lay before me on the table, amidst the heap of papers in which it had been wrapped, I am bound to say that it was not its beauty that struck me first of all. One peculiar feature about it was its extraordinary state of preservation. Some embalming process must have been employed with which I was wholly unacquainted. It looked as if it were alive. Not only so, when, after some not inconsiderable amount of hesitation, I ventured to pick it up, it felt warm to the touch. Almost unwittingly, I pressed it, as I might have pressed a friendly hand in greeting. It seemed to return my pressure. Of course, it was all imagination, but it was imagination of a rather ghastly kind. So vivid was the delusion that I let it fall back on the table with a start that was sufficiently real. The hand had been severed with what had evidently been some sharp instrument just above the wrist. A joint or some fraction of the bone, I am no anatomist, had apparently been withdrawn so that the skin overlapped it at the end. A white skin it was. I never saw a whiter. Yet it was not bloodless white. Indeed, it was not difficult to believe that warm blood was circulating underneath. It was a little hand. It struck me as being exquisitely shaped. A dainty hand. The fingers were long and slender and tapered to a point. The fingernails were perfect. They were pink, as are the fingernails of some young girls. It was those almond-shaped, pink, well-kept fingernails which, as much as anything else, gave to the hand such a curious semblance of life. The fingers and thumb were close together, so that, as it lay palm downwards, the thumb was in the air, and only the fingertips pressing against the table, the whole hand forming a sort of arch. It was a right hand. On the forefinger was a ring, so quaint a ring that in itself it was a curio. It was of plain gold, clumsily fashioned, and at the back it had been beaten out by some unskilled craftsman into what had probably been intended to represent a heart-shaped shield. On it were some roughly graven words which, at any rate, without a microscope, I was unable to decipher. I attributed the thing at a rough and ready estimate to perhaps the latter portion of the 14th century. It seemed odd to see that ill-shaped and ancient gewgaw on the pretty finger of that dainty little hand. It was an extraordinary legacy, even for a collector to receive. It appeared that it was a legacy, this woman's hand, from a man, too, who had been but a shadowy acquaintance. It had reached me by a singularly matter-of-fact route, the parcels post. I wondered if the post office officials would have said anything if they had known what it was that they were carrying. With it had come a letter in which David Wishaw informed me that his brother Colin was dead, of which fact I had known nothing, and cared, if possible, still less, and that it had been one of Colin's very last requests that the hand, which according to David had been known in the family as Lady Wishaw's hand, should be sent to me as a legacy. Very kind of Colin, and also of David, on my honour. David went on to say that Colin had been aware that I was a great collector of curiosities, and he had felt very strongly that Lady Wishaw's hand was a curiosity that I should value. Had he, indeed? Kinder still and kinder. The hand, said David, had been an heirloom in the family. Then what on earth did the man mean by passing his family heirlooms on to me, an almost utter stranger? It had been in the family in uninterrupted sequence since 1382. When I read that, I wondered whether the man took me for an idiot. The hand, that hand which was lying before me on the table, had been in his family, or anybody's family, since 1382? I doubted very much if it had not been upon a living woman's arm, certainly within the last 6 months. What was I to do with such a legacy? I might be a collector of curiosities, a virtuoso or bric-a-brac hunter, if you please, but I was not a curator of an anatomical museum. The curiosities which I collected did not include detached portions of the human frame. The Messrs. Colin and David Wishaw seemed both of them to have laboured under the same misapprehension. I knew a man who collected the ropes with which criminals had been hanged. He was a virtuoso of the kind which I was not. Mr. Colin Wishaw should have bequeathed, and Mr. David Wishaw should have dispatched by means of the parcel post this curiosity to him. The ring on the finger did seem more in my way. Getting a magnifying glass, I endeavoured to make out the legend which was on the shield. The ring was old, there could be no doubt about that. It might date from 1382. The legend, in the first place, had been ill done, and in course of time it had become so worn that, even with the aid of a good glass, it was difficult to render. I take mine own. That's what it is, I finally decided. It's either seek or take. I fancy it's take. I take mine own. I wonder if that is the motto of the Wishaws. I have a good mind to write to Mr. David Wishaw, and to send him back the hand, and to tell him that, with his permission, as a mark of my appreciation of his brother's thought of me, I'll keep the ring. I might add that, in my judgment, it would be well if the hand were decently interred. Let's see if I can take the ring off the lady's finger, so that I can have a look at it at close quarters. With this idea, and with the intention of putting the idea into execution, I once more picked up the hand, though I own I touched it with reluctance. Holding it with my left hand, grasping the ring with the fingers on my right, I prepared to work it loose. Instantly, the hand shut up. It was clenched into a fist. I do not think I was ever so startled in my life. The action was so natural, so lifelike, that though I was in my own drawing-room, and it was broad day, and there was no one present but the hand and myself, it seemed almost as if my heart had leapt into my mouth. It was no optical delusion. The open hand had become a tightened fist. No doubt it was owing to some muscular contraction, but it was muscular contraction of a sort I did not like. So startled was I that for some moments I did nothing but stare. When I could do something else, I dropped the hand as if it had been a red-hot coal. I sprang to my feet. I'll send it back to Mr. David Wishaw directly after lunch, ring and all. I was momentarily expecting lunch to be announced. It would not do to leave the hand lying on the table, so I hurriedly caught up the papers in which it had come, and wrapping them about it anyhow, I put it in a cabinet which stood upon a small side table. As I was finishing lunch, there came a knock at the hall door. Nolder went to see who it was. Nolder is the most excellent servant, one whom scarcely anything would induce to forget his place. Therefore I was the more surprised when, after a few minutes' absence, he reappeared with an expression of countenance which suggested both bewilderment and pain. He was rubbing his thigh, too, in a manner which, considering that he was standing in the presence of his master, was highly unbecoming. "What's the matter, Nolder?" "Well, sir, it's Mr. Brasher, sir." "Mr. Brasher? What do you mean? What's the matter with Mr. Brasher?" "Well, sir, nothing's the matter with Mr. Brasher that I am aware of, but a most extraordinary thing has happened. At least, I beg your pardon, sir, it seems to me an extraordinary thing. When I showed Mr. Brasher up into the drawing-room, I noticed that the ormolu cabinet, which stands on the Chippendale tripod table, was open. This was the cabinet in which I had placed Mr. Colin Wishaw's legacy. I must unintentionally have omitted to close it when I had left the room. I went to close it, and directly I had done so, just as I was turning round, someone or something caught me in the fleshy part of the leg, and gave me such a nip that I do believe there is a piece nipped out." "Someone or something? What do you mean by someone or something?" "I don't know, sir, I really don't. There was no one or nothing near me that I could see, and that's why I say it's a most extraordinary thing. But I never did feel anything so painful, never." I left Nalder still rubbing his thigh in a manner which his previous conduct had certainly given me no reason to expect from him. When I went upstairs, I found Martin Brasher standing in the centre of the room with a look on his face which might have been twin brother to the look I had seen on Nalder's. "Pew!" was his salutation to me as I went in. "What on earth have you got in this room of yours?" "I have a good many things in this room of mine, as, if you had eyes, you would be able to see. What is the matter with you?" "Upon my word, I hardly know what is the matter with me. Do you know, I was just sitting on that armchair waiting for you, when something, it felt like somebody's fingernails, scratched my cheek from top to bottom. Isn't there a scratch to be seen?" There was, unmistakably. On his left cheek there was what was obviously the mark of a recent scratch. "You've been in dreamland, Brasher, and scratched yourself in your dream." "Nothing of the kind. I tell you what, Pew, it's uncommonly queer. But never mind about that. Now, I have come to tell you that I have got a case at last." "A case of what?" "A case for the Society, a genuine ghost. Have you ever heard of a man named Wishaw?" I had, very much indeed, and very recently, but he didn't give me a chance. He was so very full of his subject that he went dashing on without noticing that he had not afforded me an opportunity to answer. "They're a Scottish family, the Wishaws, one of those Scottish families which antedate the deluge. They've had some peculiar characters among them in their time, more peculiar than pleasant, as some of these Scottish families have had a way of having. One of the most peculiar was a woman who lived somewhere about the close of the 14th century, a propitious period, especially in Scotland, for peculiar characters. She is known amongst them to this day as Lady Wishaw. You know how they have that sort of thing in stories. She was the most beautiful woman that ever was, that's of course. She was also the wickedest woman that ever was, that's equally of course. She does appear to have done something to deserve a niche as the latter in the Temple of Fame. She was a thief. Such a thief that she became notorious as a thief, even in that age and land of thieves. She stole from foes and friends alike. At last, in the house of a friend, she was caught red-handed in some more astounding theft than usual. We should have called her a kleptomaniac, I suspect, in these latter days. The term was not invented then, nor the thing. To her host she appeared to have been guilty of an act of hideous treachery. Taking upon himself, as was not uncommon in those sweet and simple days, the office of judge, jury, and executioner, there and then he hacked off her hand at the wrist. The first intimation which the Wishaws received of the latest petit faux pas in which the lady had indulged came to them in a rather grisly fashion. The lady's guilty, but I understand lovely member, was sent to them by the host in charge of a special messenger. The lady herself they never saw again, at least in life. She felt when she had lost her hand that she had lost all that there was worth living for. She destroyed herself within the hour. Thus, as you perceive, there was ample ground why a pleasant little feud should exist henceforth between the whilom friends, the Wishaws, and the McPhees. The host's name it was, it seems, McPhee. The story goes that the dismembered lady managed to convey some sort of spiritual intimation to her relatives to the effect that they were never to cease from killing while the McPhees still remained to cumber the ground. Thenceforward, the first end and aim of the Wishaws was to kill the McPhees. And in order that they might not forget their high calling, a special injunction was laid on them that they were to keep the hacked-off hand ever with them as a sort of heirloom and as a perpetual reminder until the last of the McPhees was slain. Not only so, they were given clearly to understand that should a Wishaw arise, who before the McPhees were wholly exterminated should prove unworthy and should cease from killing, the dead hand would turn against the living man and would measure out to him that measure which he should have measured out to the McPhees. This is a queer story. I felt that it was. But the queerest part is still to come. I am informed on credible authority that the hand was never embalmed, and nothing had been done to preserve it, of any sort or kind, that it has continued uninterruptedly in that possession of the Wishaws, and that after the passage of several centuries it still looks as fresh and as lifelike as if the original owner still had it, in the proper place, at the end of her arm. As to the truth of this portion of the story touching the appearance of the life which the hand possessed, I could have gone to the cabinet, taken out the contents, and given him the proof on the spot. And I may add that I should have done it, had it not been that a contraction of the muscles of my throat seemed to keep me a fixture in my chair. Pew, I mean to see that hand. He should have seen it then and there, had not the sensation of which I had suddenly become conscious almost amounted to strangulation. It strikes me that there is a clear case for the Psychical Research Society at last. I have chanced, almost by accident, upon some extraordinary stories of Lady Wishaw's hand. It seems that the Wishaws did not keep on killing the McPhees, but the latter was a prolific breed. As soon as the sire was struck down, a son sprang up. There came a time when murder, even in Scotland, was not looked upon with such lenient eyes. Still the Wishaws pursued the even tenor of their ways. More than one of them has brought himself within the clutches and has suffered the last penalties of the law. Finally, even the Wishaws succumbed to the influence of the new spirit of the newer age. In fact, they ceased to murder. When they ceased, the hand, the dead hand, Lady Wishaw's hand, began. Pew, I have reason to believe that literally for generations the head of the family, for the time being, has been found strangled in his bed. Brasher paused. He stood in front of me with a dramatic gesture. With an effort, I found myself able to speak. Where did you get that piece of information from, may I inquire? Never mind where I got it from, it is so. You may take it from me that the thing was kept hushed up. It was given out that they died from a spasmodic affection of the heart. Nothing of the kind. There was never a Wishaw with a weak heart. At last, only two of them left, Colin Wishaw, the head of the house, and David, his younger brother. Colin was something like a madman. From the little I had seen of him, he had struck me as being about as mad as a man could be, without being pronounced legally and medically insane. He swore a great oath that he would rid himself and the family of Lady Wishaw's hand. If what you have told me is correct, Brasher, I fail to see any signs of madness in his doing that. The extraordinary part of the thing was the way in which he set himself to carry out his oath. He put the hand in a coffin and buried it, coffin and all. Lady Wishaw's hand returned to him from the grave. Oh, Brasher, come. So I am told. He took it with him across the Atlantic. In mid-ocean, he dropped it into the sea. When he reached his hotel room in New York, he found it at his bedside in the morning. He cast it into the smelter's furnace. It was waiting for him when he got home. I am credibly assured that he cooked it and ate it, only to find it on his pillow when he went to bed. Brasher, your story begins to remind me of a poem which I read in my childhood days, which, if I remember rightly, was called, and appropriately called, A Horrible Tale. Wait a bit. About a fortnight ago, Colin Wishaw was found dead in his bed. There was no mistake about it this time. He had been strangled. It was impossible to hush it up. An inquest was held. The verdict was that he had been strangled by some person or persons unknown. If that were so, what on earth did David Wishaw mean by saying that, almost with his last breath, Colin had bequeathed what appeared to be, par excellence, the heirloom of the Wishaws as a legacy to me? Mr. David Wishaw was a nice man, upon my word. The present possessor of Lady Wishaw's hand, continued Brasher, is David Wishaw, the last living representative of the Wishaw strain. Was he? He would very soon be the possessor, though he was not then. I am going to call on Mr. David Wishaw. I shall request him to allow me to examine the hand. I intend to make inquiries as to the truth of its extraordinary history. As I have told you, I have reason to believe that truth will be made quite plain. Should that be so, I shall present the case for the immediate consideration of the Psychical Research Society. I think you will agree with me that a more remarkable case will hardly come its way. I quite agreed that, if he could find evidence to prove it, it would be a remarkable case. And I was more than once on the point of informing him that if he desired to look at and to examine Lady Wishaw's hand, he need go no further than where he stood. But each time, as the words had already almost escaped my lips, I again became conscious of what I can only describe as that curious and distinctly involuntary suppression of the larynx. When Martin Brasher went, he left, so to speak, his story behind him. I heartily wished he had not. The story might sound incredible, it might even sound absurd. But there are men, sane men, who are entirely of opinion that it is quite within the bounds of reason to suppose that there may be what the world commonly calls spiritual manifestations, dealings between the seen and the unseen. Of such men I avowedly am one. And the idea that there had come to me from such a deathbed as Colin Wishaw's appeared to have been a gift which was, in itself, a ghastly gift, with which was associated such a history, the mere idea to me was full of horror. Besides, what had prevented me from speaking? What was it that had caused that sensation of pressure about the region of my throat, and so stayed me from telling Brasher that the thing for which he was about to seek all the time was at his side, within reach of his arm? What had pinched Nolde? It was a ridiculous inquiry, perhaps, but what had? What had scratched Brasher's face? What had caused the open hand to shut up into a clenched fist before my very eyes? Was it because the hand, though dead, was living, and was still attached to a living form, though unseen? Men are made in different fashions. Some men would have found in my situation nothing but pleasurable excitement. For my part, I sat in my chair and perspired. I was unwilling to be left alone in my own drawing-room, even though it was broad day. Nothing but shame prevented me from summoning Nolde to come and keep me company. On one point I was resolved, that Lady Wishaw's hand should not remain in my possession. For 2 hours I endeavoured to summon up sufficient resolution to enable me to rise from my chair and go to the cabinet, and to take out the hand, and to pack it up, and to return it from whence it came. As I look back upon those 2 hours, I'm inclined to wonder how it was that, as they have it in the nightmare stories, during their passage my hair did not turn grey. All the while I had the consciousness that something was in the room with me. Something seemed to keep stroking the back of my hand, something with the delicate touch of a dainty woman. I knew that the starch was coming out of my linen. I felt that my collar was becoming as limp as a rag. At last, with what positively amounted to a frenzied effort, I sprang from my seat, rushed to the cabinet, opened it and reached out for the hand, and found that it was not there. There could be no question as to what were the effects of being endowed with too vivid an imagination. In the papers in which I had hastily wrapped Lady Wishaw's hand before going down to lunch, there was nothing at all. "Nolde! Nolde!" I scarcely think that I expected him to hear me call. I am under the impression that I hardly spoke above a whisper. I began to stagger towards the door, intending to go out onto the landing and call him loudly. As I turned, something was placed against my mouth, something which felt like the slender fingers of a woman's hand, and my lips were sealed. Chapter 2. I dined at the club. I am unable to say how I reached it. I know that I did reach it. For me, at least, that is sufficient. I had a little table at the third window from the door. Perkins was my waiter. Perkins is not only an excellent waiter, he is, what is almost of as much importance, an excellent man. I am persuaded that Perkins and I have many things in common. He knows exactly what I like and how I like it. When he tells me what to eat, I eat it, without so much as a hint of amendment. Never yet have I found that the house of my confidence has been builded on the sand. I remember that on that particular night I had one of the finest woodcocks I have ever tasted. Plain roast. I almost inclined to believe that Perkins must have raised that bird himself, have shot it himself, have hung it himself, and have cooked it himself. He had its history so completely at his finger ends. Brash's story and my 2 hours' agony had almost faded from my mind. I do not say that the woodcock was wholly responsible, but it had certainly borne its part. I was just going to drink my second glass of champagne. I don't care what anybody says. Everybody has his own taste, and with woodcock I like champagne. I dare say in another half-minute I should have thanked God that I was alive. The glass was still on its way to my lips when, without any sort of warning, in an instant there returned to me that hideous consciousness which had been with me in the afternoon, that something was in the room. I do not mean the waiters or the diners or that sort of thing. I wish I did. I mean something intangible, unseen. I put down my glass untasted. A cold shiver went over me. Then I began to perspire. My feeling was one of the acutest misery. My first impulse, in spite of the woodcock, was to wish that I was dead. In that brilliantly lighted room, with all the people about me, I was afraid. Perkins was at my side. He had his back to me for some cause or other at the moment. All at once he faced round to me, with quite a little twirl. To be frank, it was not the kind of movement which was becoming to Perkins. One of his great charms is that he never evinces what I consider indecorous signs of haste. Of an actual twirl, as if he had been a sort of human teetotum, I do not think that he ever had been guilty before. "I beg your pardon, sir." I have no doubt that I looked at him with what were lacklustre eyes. I believe that I murmured, "Eh?" "Did you touch me, sir?" "Touch you? What do you mean?" I really must ask you to excuse me, sir. Perkins is an educated man. But I certainly was under the impression, sir, that you pulled my coat-tails. I pulled his coat-tails? Oh, waiters! I had, after all, overestimated Perkins' intellectual powers, if he could suppose that I could be capable of such an action as that. But I said nothing. I rose from the table there and then and went away. I dare say that Perkins imagined that I was bitterly offended. I should certainly have been justified in being so, or perhaps he imagined that I had suddenly gone mad. I left my second glass of champagne untasted. I did not wait for the sweets. Perkins has an exquisite taste in sweets. His sweets never give me indigestion. I said nothing about his wife. I always inquire after Perkins' wife, who I understand is paralysed, and as good as dead, when he has seen that I have had a creditable dinner. I went into the smoking room. I do not know why. I was in no mood to smoke. I take it that I went in there simply because, with that intangible, unseen something keeping me company, I could not go home. Several men were in the smoking room, tolerably comfortably they seemed, as for a moment I stood at the door and looked round. I envied them. Their contentment with the position in life in which they found themselves placed was so transparently greater than mine. My moving to a seat seemed to create a slight sensation. Each man, as I passed him, gave a perceptible start. Again, I don't know why, I had scarcely seated myself before I became aware that something curious was going on. I seemed to have brought with me an element of discord into the room. Those that had seemed so wholly at their ease as I viewed them from the door seemed all at once to have been attacked by a fit of the fidgets. A most pronounced type of the fidgets, too. The attack seemed to be passing from one smoker to the other, right round the room. Under cover of an evening paper, I pretended to notice nothing. But I did. Man after man sprang up in his seat and looked about him with an air of startled surprise. Pranklin was sitting in front of me. Plain Pranklin, they call him, to distinguish him from the other Pranklin, Picture Pranklin, who has a chamber of horrors, which he calls his picture gallery. Plain Pranklin is in his 70s, and would turn the scale, I dare say, at 18 stone. So when I say that he suddenly sprang up from his seat as if he had been an india-rubber ball, I am aware that the language which I use is strong. "Good God!" he exclaimed. Everybody looked at him. All the room was in a stir. "What's up, Pranklin?" asked Sir Gerald Carr. "Who was that caught hold of my hand?" "Caught hold of your hand? What do you mean?" "Hanged if I know what I do mean." Pranklin looked to me as if he were on the verge of an apoplectic fit. "I know that someone caught hold of my hand and twisted it right round." A man whom I don't know spoke next. "That's odd. A moment before someone or something did exactly the same to me." "Be George!" cried old Jack Brett. "But there's the devil in the room. I swear that someone nearly pulled me hand clean off my wrist." "And mine! And mine!" Nearly every person present claimed to have undergone a similar experience. There were a score of men turning the smoking room into a bedlam. I don't know what the committee would have said. I, for my part, sat as if I were glued to my chair, for directly Pranklin sprang from his seat, I felt a hand steal into mine, and fingers and a thumb clasp it about. "Hullo," said Carr. "What's gone wrong with you? You don't look well." I rose from my seat with a palsied start. As I did so, the hand let me go. "I'm not feeling well. I think that I'll go home." I went home there and then. As I moved across the room, every man jack of them followed me with their eyes. I don't know if they thought that I had bewitched them or played some hanky-panky trick. They looked as if they did. As I went along the passage and down the steps into the street, I felt someone twitching at my coat sleeve. I hailed a cab. I bade the cabman drive me home. All the time, as he drove me through the street, I felt as if there were someone seated beside me in the cab, someone who continually twitched me by the arm. I doubt if there was ever a sane creature in such a state of mind as I then was. Nalder let me in. He started when he saw my face. "I hope, sir, you are not ill." "To tell the truth, Nalder, I am not feeling quite the thing. I think I'll have some brandy in my bedroom and go to bed." I had the strongest reluctance to go, unaccompanied, up my own staircase. I hung about in the hall until Nalder appeared with some brandy on a tray. Together we went up, he in front and I behind. I don't know what he thought of me. He is too well trained as a servant to betray his feelings in his face. At the same time, he is possessed of too much discernment to have failed to see that my indisposition was of a peculiar kind, especially when, under one pretext and another, I kept him in my bedroom until I was actually between the sheets in bed. "Shall I leave the light burning, sir?" It is a peculiarity of mine that I can never sleep where there is a light in the room. On that occasion my choice seemed to lie between the devil and the deep sea. The idea of being left in the dark filled me with a paralysis of horror. On the other hand, what might I not be destined to witness if the room was lit? I chose mechanically what I could only hope would turn out to be the lesser evil of the two. Leave it burning. If I find that it keeps me from sleeping, I will get out of bed and put it out. I did not get out of bed to put it out. Queerly enough, scarcely had Nalder turned his back than I fell asleep. I must have done, because I remember nothing after he left the room. Nothing, that is, until I awoke. I was not troubled with a dream. I must have slept the quiet, dreamless sleep of tired childhood. What woke me, I do not know, even to this hour. I know that I did wake to find myself in a cold sweat of agony, quivering under the overwhelming burden of some unknown horror. For some moments I was only conscious that the room was still lighted. At first I seemed to have to gasp for breath, but by degrees the curtain of unconsciousness was partly lifted, and I became aware that something was with me in the room. Whatever it was, I cannot say. It was something, too, which touched me on the brow with a light touch, such as we might use to awaken a sleeper out of sleep. Only that touch was like the touch of death. I believe that it was the touch of death. Light though it was, under it I could not move. While it remained, I doubt if I breathed. I lay, as I have said, in a cold sweat of agony. When the touch was removed, I closed my eyes. I was afraid of what it was I might see. For what was a period of a few moments, I suppose, nothing happened, though I never for an instant lost consciousness of the presence which was with me in the room. As I lay with my eyes fast closed in agony, something tangible fell on my cheek from above. It had something of the effect of an electric shock. With what I apprehend was an involuntary tension of the muscles of my body, I leapt out of bed on the floor. I believe that, as I stood on the floor, I cried. Then I stretched out my arms on either side of me as a blind man might do. Then, and only then, I opened my eyes and saw. Leaning over the bed, I saw that on the pillow on which my head had just been lying was a ring. I never had a moment's doubt as to the ring's identity. Having seen it once, it was one which I could never forget. It was the ring which had been on the forefinger of the hand which, according to David Wishaw, his brother Colin had bequeathed to me as a legacy. The ring which the dead hand had seemed to resent my attempting to remove from its place by clenching itself into a fist. Was it possible that it was offered to me as a present after all? Then by whom? My heart melted within me as I realized that it was an offering from the presence which was with me in the room. I shrank away. I extended my arms as if to prevent the ring from coming to closer quarters. As I did so, I saw a hand advancing across the pillow from the opposite side of the bed. It was the hand which, having once been seen under such circumstances as I had seen it, was no more to be mistaken than the ring. It was indeed the hand to which it belonged, the hand of which Brasher had told such a horrible tale, the hand which, according to him, had urged to murder through the centuries, and then, when its urgings had failed, had murdered on its own account. I saw the hand coming slowly across the bed. It at no time touched the pillow, but without any visible support was in the air at a distance above the pillow of perhaps a couple of inches. I saw the dainty fingers close upon the ring. When I saw that, with a spasmodic effort, I turned my face away. My glance fell upon the clock, which was on the mantel-shelf. I noticed with a singular degree of vividness that, according to that clock, the time was 25 to 4. A touch came on my arm. I started round. In front of me was the hand. It was palm uppermost. On the open palm was the ring. It was being held out for me to take, but I would have none of it, although the chance of becoming the possessor of so genuine and unique a curio was hardly likely ever to come again in my way. I slunk back. The hand followed me. It moved quicker than I did. It caught me by the wrist. It pressed the ring against my palm, but I still would have none of it. I made no attempt to close my hand so as to retain the ring within my grasp. Suddenly the something which guided and ruled the hand, and never, as I said, for a moment did I lose consciousness of the something which was there. Suddenly this something seemed to become annoyed. My persistent, automatic refusal of the proffered ring seemed, in some fantastic way, to give annoyance. All at once the hand was withdrawn. It was clenched. It was held before me in the air. I saw the ring between the little dainty fingers. Then, with an extraordinary degree of violence, it was thrown against my face. Chapter 3. "Why are you lying there upon the floor?" It was Brasher's voice. I found, as he said, that I was lying in my nightshirt on the floor. I sat up. I saw that the light still burned. "Has it gone?" "Has what gone? What has happened to your face?" I put my hand to my face. When I removed it, it was dabbled with blood. It all came back to me, the extreme violence of the movement with which the hand had hurled the ring at me through the air. "The ring," was all I said. "The ring? What ring?" I rose to my feet. I dimly perceived that for some cause Brasher was almost as much disturbed as I myself. We looked each other in the face. "Pew!" He caught me by the arm. His hand was shaking. "Where is Lady Wishaw's hand?" I looked round the room. "Is it still here?" "Here? Where? For God's sake, don't speak like that. Your voice is as hoarse as a crow's." I felt him shiver. "Why did you not tell me yesterday that you were the present fortunate possessor of Lady Wishaw's hand?" I said nothing. He went on. Owing to his haste, or to some other cause, he seemed to pronounce his words as if he were temporarily afflicted with an impediment in his speech. It's been at its devil's tricks again. I've come straight from Wishaw's. David's dead. Dead? David Wishaw? Brasher! Don't look at me like that. You look at me as though you were looking at a ghost. Taking out his handkerchief, he wiped his brow. Yes, David Wishaw's dead. He was the last of the breed. With him, all of them have gone. It seems that this morning, at 3:15... When? This morning, at 3:15, his servants heard him screaming in his room. When they went to his aid, they could not get to him because the door was locked. They heard him fighting and yelling within. They called to him but could get no answer. All was still when the shrieking ceased. They found the door open. They found him dead. He had been strangled. He was a strong man. He must have fought furiously for his life because they found him lying in a hideous heap on his bed. Brasher, Lady Wishaw's hand was with me here at 4:25. Phew! His jaw dropped down. Yes, Brasher, it was here with me. Are you sure that you were not mistaken? And because I would not have the ring, which it endeavoured to force upon my acceptance, it flung it in my face with such violence that it cut my face right open, as you see. I wonder if that ring is anywhere upon the floor. No. We searched everywhere, but it was nowhere to be found. After all, the hand had vanished with that ancient gewgaw of a ring. Acting up to the legend which seemed to me to have been inscribed upon it, Lady Wishaw's hand had taken its own. That was Lady Wishaw's Hand by Richard Marsh, the pseudonym of Richard Bernard Heldman. 2 years after this was published, he wrote The Beetle, a story which was more popular than Bram Stoker's Dracula, which came out the same year. I hope you enjoyed this really creepy story. There are more creepy stories in my YouTube channel. I have a section called audiobooks and you'll find them there. If you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so and hit the little bell, and then you'll know when more stories come out. And as always, thank you for listening.